This is the Analysing Anfield podcast on the Blood Red channel, bringing you the best tactical and statistical analysis of Liverpool FC.
Hello and welcome to the latest Analysing Anfield podcast from Blood Red and the Liverpool Echo. I'm your guest host, Matt Addison. There's no Dave Hughes this week, but Josh Williams is alongside me as usual. We'll be having a look back at Atletico Madrid very shortly and then having a bit of a preview of the weekend's game with Manchester United at Old Trafford. Let's start though at the Wanda Metropolitano, where Liverpool won 3-2 against an angry Diego Simeone's Atletico Madrid. I'll start just in terms of some general thoughts on the game, Josh. Were you surprised at all at how Atletico approached the game? I think they were probably a lot more adventurous than probably most people might have thought that they would be.
No, well, I did flag before the game that they seem to have not stumbled upon, but they seem to have moved towards a different system this season. Now, a Diego Simeone team will always be the same, really. It'll always have the same kind of identity, same kind of playing style. But I did flag last week with Dave that he has built a squad to the extent now that despite representing such a playing style, all the individuals in the team, well, most of them at least, are really actually very creative, and lots of them have got lots of flair about them, individual quality, good on a dribble, and things like that. It's a back three system that he stumbled across. But if you look at some of the midfielders and the forwards, like João Felix, Antoine Griezmann, Thomas Lemar, Rodrigo de Paul, Yannick Carrasco, Koke, I suppose you could throw in there. Kieran Trippier, we know is fairly decent, fairly progressive on the ball. So he's got himself in a position now where I think Dave summed it up fairly well last week. He said it's the structure really that provides the defensive stability. And then going forward, just to an extent, the outstanding ability of the individuals does a lot of the attacking for them. So I did expect Liverpool to have a bit of a tricky game when it comes to nullifying counter-attacks. And we did see that, although I certainly didn't expect a 3-2.
No, we'll come on to some more of those kind of topics. We'll touch on Fabinho, some of the more controversial topics and discussion points as well to come. But we'll start with a fairly easy one. Mohamed Salah, again crucial for Liverpool. I actually thought Atletico did pretty well to contain him in the main, but he still comes away with 2 goals and pretty much a match-winning performance again for Liverpool.
Yeah, well, it is very fitting with the theme at the minute. Sometimes when Klopp mentions a lot the momentum. He uses the word momentum quite a lot, I think. And, I suppose from a data perspective, from an analytics perspective, you could argue, does momentum even exist? Is it even a thing? But I do think that when it comes to players like this and when it comes to form, certain things like that, I do think sometimes you just get in the flow, really. And I think Salah, although he was quieter than usual, I would say, it is a bit of a case of every touch his turns to goal at the minute. And obviously, at the very start, he did look sharp. I thought it was a bit of a mismatch, him facing Carrasco, considering Carrasco was usually a forward. And obviously, the shot, a little bit of deflection, I think there was in there. But he finds the back of the net, and then obviously the penalty. He's getting, should we say, intimidated by Jan Oblak, one of the Wales best keepers. Funnily enough, I actually had a look during the week at Oblak's numbers. Obviously, we flag Alisson's numbers all the time when it comes to saving and things like that. And Oblak's one of the few who, over the past few years, has overperformed to more than Alisson. So I think Alisson, since 2017, which includes his last season at Roma, I think Alisson's overperformed by about 23 goals, which is quite ridiculous. He's saved about 23 goals more than the average keeper would have. Not many can match that, but Jan Oblak, over the same period, has saved 32.9 goals more than expected, which I think he's benefited maybe from bodies getting in front of shots and things like that at Atletico. But I suppose it captures his level as a goalkeeper. But then if you look at Salah, he sends him the wrong way, and again, just fits with the theme of everything going right for him at the moment.
We'll come on to the rest of the Liverpool forward line in a second, but just whilst you mentioned Alisson there, I thought it was a match-winning performance from him as well. A couple of really good saves, and it's again another example. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the save against Napoli almost. he kind of makes things look a lot easier than what they are, just purely from the positioning that he puts himself in. He makes goalkeeping look a lot easier than what it is, and maybe doesn't get the credit for that because of that.
No, he is honestly such a massive player for Liverpool, Alisson Becker. He, some of the shots he faces, he will save, and a lot of the arguments sometimes is, well, it's just hit him. But a lot of the time, if it just hits him, that's because his positioning is so good that he's put himself in a position where that's been the case, that's happened. So as a goalkeeper, he is outstanding. And when it comes to 1v1s, specifically big 1v1s over the years, I can think of plenty. I've recalled one last season, or maybe the season before, Stamford Bridge. I think he did 2 in the same game, I think. Can't remember who he was against. Obviously, you mentioned there the Napoli one, and he just does it a lot in the big games. And if you look at what we tend to look at in the numbers, Liverpool's performances and stuff, we do look at performances as the reason behind why you might win a game. Hopefully, if you get the performance right, you get the results. If you don't get the performance right, you more often than not lose. But I think with Liverpool, when you've got a keeper as good as Alisson and Becker, when you've got a keeper as good as Alisson in goal, he can just provide just an additional bit of compensation if your performance isn't that perfect. If your performance is lacking a little bit, you're a little bit more leaky than usual. He's just that good individually that he can just provide that additional safety net on top of the performance that Liverpool usually delivered. And this is why it's so hard to defeat Liverpool generally, because the performance is always so good. And even when it's slightly not, Liverpool have got such clinical players at one end of the field and such difference-making players on the defensive side as well, that it's just really hard to come away from Liverpool with 3 points. And I think yesterday you mentioned there, Salah comes away with a top performance, but I do think that the man of the match for me was probably Alisson.
We'll come on to the defence and a couple of question marks over that shortly. But just before we do that, I wanted to sort of speak about the rest of the Liverpool forward line as well, because I think it's really interesting that maybe Sadio Mane has not been at his best for a little while. Roberto Firmino, I thought, did okay, but was maybe not absolutely spectacular against Atletico. Diogo Jota comes on and doesn't do a huge amount in an attacking sense, doesn't do anything bad by any means, but does okay. And all that being the case, Liverpool still score 3 goals. I think it's an average of 3 goals in every away game so far this season. They're doing so well in that regard. It's just interesting, I think, that even without playing perfectly, even without Mane being at his best, obviously Salah very much is. It's not a perfect front three. It's not a perfect trio. But they're still scoring 3 goals and 3 goals at the Wanda Metropolitano against a team as difficult to score 3 goals against as Atletico Madrid.
Yeah, well, I actually checked yesterday. Liverpool have played 12 matches so far this season in all competitions, and we've scored at least 3 in 9 of them. That's some go on that. And when you're scoring 3 goals in games, you're probably going to be winning most weeks. I mean, especially given Liverpool's defenders, the quality of Liverpool's defenders. We've just been mentioning Alisson there. You should be winning most weeks, even if you're scoring 2. Really, Chelsea are the only team to keep Liverpool from scoring more than once in a match so far this season. And if you just look at Liverpool's approach, I think it is just kind of a culmination of working on the Jurgen Klopp for 6 years now. Liverpool have got threats absolutely everywhere. If you look at sometimes, like say for example Manchester United this weekend, Liverpool could, if they wanted to, funnel all of the ball towards Wan-Bissaka if they wanted to. So they could set up defensively against Manchester United in a way that presents Wan-Bissaka as the free man. And you would do that in some games, knowing that Wan-Bissaka is not going to hurt you. If you look at Liverpool, there's kind of no player really where you can do that to. You think of Van Dyke, the ball's over the top, the diagonal passes. You think of Matip, his ability to carry the ball out, his willingness to dribble, despite being a centre-back. Trent speaks for himself. Robertson speaks for himself. Fabinho has assisted plenty of goals from deep in past few seasons. Scores a few from deep as well. Liverpool's number 8, obviously, we know, are very well-rounded. And then the front 3. So it is a case of Liverpool just, after 6 years under Klopp, just being so good in attack and having so many different ways of scoring, set pieces, crosses, through balls over the top, penalty, tricky dribblers in the box to win penalties and free kicks. There's everything. There's a full armoury, really. And it bodes well for the rest of the season, actually, because I think I remember reading a while back, generally there's a bit of a study associated with football and goal scoring that generally every goal equals a point over the course of a season. It's not obviously absolutely perfect, but it is generally how it works. I'll have a look at last season just to prove my point. Yeah, so last season Liverpool scored 68 goals, finished on 69 points. Manchester United scored 73 goals, finished on 74 points. Manchester City scored 83 goals, finished on 86 points. Leicester City scored 68 goals, finished on 66 points. So generally, that is how it works. So if Liverpool have got the best attack in the league, which it looks like at the minute by some distance, at least when it comes to putting the ball in the actual net, it bodes well for winning the title, to be honest.
At the other end of the pitch, maybe not quite as perfect as what we might like it to be in terms of the defending at times. There was a couple of bits where they tried to play offside and it didn't quite work. But I'm interested to sort of get your take on that. I know Spanish publication Marca, they gave Virgil van Dyke a rating of 0 out of 5, I think it is, for his performance, which I thought was a bit bizarre, slight exaggeration of how poor he was. I thought he did okay, generally speaking. But is it one of those situations where Liverpool, the way that they defend, if it's perfect, it's perfect. And if it's not quite perfect, you maybe get one or two big chances?
Yeah, I think it's a very risky defensive game that Liverpool play. It's high up the field, it's pressing. It only works if the midfield and the defence and the forward line are all coordinated as one entity almost. Sometimes if they're a little bit off, basically, it can result in a bit of a nightmare. We saw that last season against Aston Villa. The 7-2. Liverpool had Van Dijk on the pitch that game, had Gomez. I think Fabinho played. But it was just one of them that Liverpool lacked something. And whereas in the past, if you have an off day, you might concede 3. In the modern game, when you're playing such a risky game, if it goes wrong, you're going to concede even more than that. And obviously, Liverpool only conceded 2 against Atletico. But just generally, it was a bit of a messy performance, a bit of a shaky performance, maybe, let's say. The kind of performance you would probably see if you didn't have that much faith in your centre-backs, or if you didn't have that much faith in your goalkeeper. But obviously, Liverpool do. So, yeah, it was a bit of a strange one, but you have to put a bit of the emphasis on Atletico's players. They've got, as I said, they've got a really defensive system, but really creative, talented individuals there who can cause you problems. But yeah, it wasn't the best from Liverpool on the defensive side. And so far this season, to be honest, I think the defence has a lot more to do than the attack when it comes to getting to title winning levels, let's say, maybe.
Yeah, it was a little bit similar to the Brentford game and certainly the first half against Manchester City at times. We'll come on to the midfield and the midfielders who did play very shortly, but I wanted to ask you as well about Fabinho, a player who didn't play. The reason for that, I think, is that he hadn't trained with his teammates prior to the game. Obviously, the short turnaround from Watford, the fact that he's come back and had to quarantine in Spain. But how important is that, do you think, for these games, to be in training with your teammates, to know the game plan inside out? I mean, he's played 130 times for Liverpool before last night. Can the game plan for Atletico Madrid be that much different to the other 130 games he's played?
It's a good point. But I do wonder, when it comes to specifically games like this away from home, when you know exactly what you're going to face. Liverpool will have known the type of opponents Atletico are. They will have known the favoured system they were going to go for and things like that. I think maybe the only surprise will have been that Suarez didn't play. But other than that, I think Liverpool will have known exactly what they were up against, basically. And when that's the case in such a tricky game away from home and things, sometimes there is just really specific things you want to work on, or really specific things you want to cater against and stuff like that. And, obviously, it's difficult to know what goes into these post-match meetings, but based on the past few seasons under Klopp, I think Liverpool do really, really well when it comes to analysing their opponent's weaknesses and targeting them and things like that. So I'm not exactly sure what it would have been. Looking at the game, I couldn't see anything specific, at least in the midfield department, that Fabinho might have not picked up on if he had missed a meeting. I couldn't see anything specific that Henderson, Milner, Keita were doing in the first half that Fabinho maybe wouldn't have been aware of or whatever. So yeah, it's a good point, but it's one of them. You just got to kind of trust in Jurgen Klopp a little bit. And on the back of the Watford performance, I can see why he maybe has just had so much faith in that midfield three and stuck with them, really, even though obviously the performances were very different.
Yeah, let's get on to those performances. We'll start with Jordan Henderson, actually. Obviously, he played the deepest role in that midfield in place of Fabinho. Did pretty well against a pretty poor Watford team at the weekend, but maybe struggled a little bit more against Atletico in that role. We know it's not his preferred role. He'd rather be further up the pitch, but it's probably not the first time this season that we've maybe been slightly underwhelmed by the sort of performance that he's put in. Not suggesting at all that we should be worried about him or anything like that. We know the quality he's got, but is it fair to say he's maybe not had a perfect start to the season?
Yeah, I think he's been a bit up and down. It's probably the best way of putting it. There was a game a few weeks ago I flagged on Analysing Anfield. I thought he was imperious almost. I think he came in as the 6. I think it was only against Burnley at Anfield. But I do remember flagging the performance as, just a really experienced, just a governing display maybe in the centre of the park. But I do think that generally, looking at his performance as a whole throughout the season, he has been a bit more up and down than usual, a little bit maybe inconsistent, you could label. So I think whereas on a normal season, on a normal period, you would maybe expect roughly a 7 out of 10 every week with Henderson. I think this season he's posted 1 or 2 5s. I think the Burnley game would have been a 9. So just a little bit of that, just a little bit of, the up and down type stuff. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. He was obviously last to Liverpool's pre-season camp, I think, on the back of England getting to the final of the Euros. He's playing, rotating a little bit between 2 different positions. Sometimes he's playing as 6, sometimes he's playing as an 8. But again, that's something that he should be pretty familiar with now after a few years. So I'm not sure that'll be the issue. Dave flagged it last week. I think there's a bit of there's kind of new elements a little bit to the right side of number 8 role this season, specifically on the back of Harvey Elliott and what he was doing earlier in the campaign. Liverpool seem to be linking more with triangles basically on the right side of the pitch, with Sen coming inwards, Salah, and the right side of number 8 just kind of playing with patterns basically. And I think maybe you could argue that's not really Henderson's game, playing football in tight spaces, cute little possession sequences and passes around the corner and stuff like that. I don't really think that's his game. And there was a moment actually in the Atletico game in the first half on the ball. I think a pass was played into him, and I think he played like I think he either let it run through his legs, or he did like a Cruyff turn type pass, and it didn't come off, and we can see the count on the back of it. And I just remember thinking, that's never been Henderson's game. I'm not really sure why he's trying that or what, but it's a number of those factors I think that I've just mentioned coming into it really that are just making his performances go a little bit more up and down than usual maybe.
Yeah, nothing to worry about straight away, but hopefully you can turn that around in the next few weeks. Maybe slightly more of a worry might be Naby Keita. Bit of a mixed performance again from him. I thought he was really, really good. First 15, 20 minutes, scores a brilliant goal, but then he's probably one of the chief people at fault for the 2 Atletico Madrid goals and is then taken off at half-time. It's almost a bit of one game showing his Liverpool career in a nutshell almost. Very inconsistent, doesn't complete the 90 minutes, doesn't really do anything horrendously wrong, but you just want a normal game from him at this point.
Yeah, he's a weird one. I must be honest, he's a weird one to nail. I don't think I'd label him as inconsistent personally. I don't think that's the word I'd use for him. I think he's But I think he is prone to having the odd game where he seems to be a bit lost and he seems to be a bit just all over the place a little bit. And in those games, Klopp seems particularly concerned on the touchline. And I go back to the Real Madrid game. I remember he was barking orders at him in that game, and Keita was kind of looking back at the benches to say, "What do you mean? What do you want me to do?" type thing. And I think maybe on the back of about a few years working with Liverpool now, I think Klopp looks at his midfield department, and I just think generally he has a lot more trust in certain other players, like Wijnaldum. He obviously trusts a lot. He obviously trusts Jordan Henderson, Fabinho. Milner is a lieutenant who's been around the game for decades now, even though he's not maybe as much there performance-wise anymore. But I think with Keita, just on the back of some of these odd performances, there's just an element there of, I think Klopp just feels like he maybe has to protect him a bit more or take him out the firing line when things aren't going right or something like that. But he is a difficult player to nail because some of the criticism on the back of the game, he is sometimes described as a defensive liability and things like that. I think you have to be careful with that one because it really does depend what you mean by that. Because I agree to an extent, but let me just provide an example of what I mean of why he's not a defensive liability. So when it comes to pressing, which is obviously a very Liverpool thing, so far this season, only 2 players are averaging more pressures on a per 90 basis than Keita. Harvey Elliott, funny enough, and Curtis Jones. Nobody else is pressing more often than Keita. So that's obviously what we would deem as a good thing. And then when you look at his tackles as well, I don't specifically like these types of numbers, I'll be honest. But if you look at tackles, he's top of Liverpool on a per 90 basis. Wins about 4.2, tackles about 4.2 players per 90. Not so great when it comes to interceptions, but on the defensive side, numbers-wise at least, he does more than Wijnaldum does. But I think the difference is, Wijnaldum, you could just trust a bit more to be in the right position. That sort of stuff, it's a weird one. What are your thoughts on it?
I just think he's a strange case, isn't he? He's one of those players that you're desperate for him to do well, because if he could replicate that 20 minutes that he had at the start of the game across the course of a 90 minutes, I think you would have a perfect Jurgen Klopp midfielder. I think he was really good on the ball. Like you say, he's got the pressing, he's got the ability to do all of the things that Klopp wants him to do, but he's just not been able to tie that into one performance and one game where you think that's exactly it. And part of that is injuries. Obviously, part of that over the last few seasons has been an inconsistency in that regard, but it's not really the case at the moment. I think he played 3 games in 6 days during the international break, has come through that, and has then played a couple of games now this week. I think the interesting thing is what Jurgen Klopp does with him at the weekend. I mean, we'll come on to Manchester United very shortly. Liverpool don't have loads and loads of midfield options. What do you think about playing him again at the weekend? Do you think, obviously, he obviously wasn't doing what Jurgen Klopp wanted him to do on Tuesday, but for me, I'd still look at him and think, well, there's a good chance that he starts at Old Trafford for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think a lot of it would depend on, Milner's recovery at the age of 35, is he maybe? A lot of it would depend on whether Curtis Jones is fit, and I think he's back in training, I'm right in saying. But when it comes to Keita, it is a difficult one, and I think he's just generally tactically. I think there's been a bit of a question of how to use him since he came to England, and I think he's a bit similar to Ndombele, I think. Ndombele obviously came to England. In fact, no, we'll go back. Ndombele in France was part of a 2-man double pivot in the midfield. Funny enough, like Keita was in Leipzig. And the pair of them showed up in their domestic leagues in Germany and France just because of their ability to carry the ball, to break lines, unpredictability. They were also able to offer a fair bit of defensive contribution, specifically in for Keita at least. But they just take a lot of risks, or they usually take a lot of risks on the ball compared to the average central midfielder in the Premier League. The issue is when they come to England and they try and do that, if they lose the ball, the counter-attacking is so good in England that it gets to a point where if they do it a few times, you start questioning whether they should be deployed, where they're getting deployed, and you start thinking I'll have to use them higher up. And Dombele this season's been used as a number 10, probably on the back of that by Nuno. And Keita obviously doesn't have to get moved up that high because he's already part of a midfield 3 rather than midfield 2. But when it comes to Keita's general game, there's a bit of a question mark there as to how is best to use him at times. And this defensive performance where he got obviously done twice for both of the goals, it can happen. And as I said, against Atletico Madrid, who are packed full of really good individual dribblers, specifically in terms of who Keita was directly up against. Keita was directly up against Rodrigo de Paul and Thomas Lemar as Simeone's 2 number 8s. They're really attacking players to be playing in the midfield, and they're really good at carrying the ball, really good dribblers. And I think Keita gets done for the second goal by Griezmann, who's obviously a very talented forward. And Keita's played about, is it 5 games in the past 10 days or something like that? Something mad like that. It's obviously something not that, like but yeah, it's something quite crazy considering what he played for Guinea and things. So, yeah, I don't think we have to get too carried away with it. But I do think that there's something in Klopp removing him at half-time. Against Real Madrid. And I'm pretty sure there's been another game where he's been removed early as well. I just think there's something about Keita where I don't know. When it goes wrong, it's difficult to have confidence that he'll fix it. Almost, I think there's that sort of thing there in comparison to the likes of Milner and Henderson and Wijnaldum.
It's almost a little bit in like what we were saying before about the defense, where if you get it spot on, it's perfect. But if you're slightly off it, you look like you're miles off it. And I think there's a bit of that in terms of Keita. But I mean, you mentioned James Milner there. What did you make of his performance? Because I think we said it before we started recording it. It could quite easily have been him that came off as well. Yeah,
comfortably. That's my perception on it. I think although Keita got done for both goals, and he's unfortunate that both the times he got done, Atletico Madrid found a net. But I did think Milner was equally problematic really in the middle of the park. I don't think Liverpool had much of a foothold in the game. I think they lacked control. And I think specifically, if you look at Keita and some of the injuries he's picked up over the years, and you look at the fact that Milner's 35 now, I think specifically Liverpool's recovery pace wasn't great in the midfield during the game. So anytime he did get beat in 1v1 dribbles and stuff, just getting back seemed to be hard for them, I thought. And obviously, if you factor in that Milner played a few days earlier, he's 35. Keita played a few days earlier. He's played loads of games in a short period now, and he's suffered from a few injuries. You know, you just generally associate Klopp's midfield, or I do at least, with legs, industry, you know, vigor, all that sort of stuff, and mobility as well as there's a massive one in there. And maybe Liverpool didn't have too much of that, and specifically when it comes to Milner, yeah, I think it was on reflection possibly a bit of a risk to play him so soon after he played, I think it was 90 minutes against Watford. But just lastly on Keita, actually, I think although he's not too much of an issue, I would personally, if I was in charge, I'd be more inclined to play him against the likes of Watford rather than Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, those types of sides. Not because he can't be trusted or not because he's not good enough or anything like that. Just because, you know, if things start to go wrong in those games, it can go badly wrong really in those games because of the quality of the opposition. Whereas if you start against Watford, there's only a certain point you can get to where what they'll punish you, and Yeah, it's one for Klopp to consider, but as I said, I don't think we should get too carried away. We were playing away against a tough opponent.
Yeah, certainly it's a tricky one for both of those players. Just lastly, before we move on to Manchester United, I wanted a quick mention of Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain as well. I was slightly surprised that he didn't play against Watford, but actually when he came on against Atletico, I thought he looked really, really good.
I agree. The issue with Ox is he's done that a few times, and I think on the back of that, he's been presented with an opportunity or more substitute minutes or whatever. And then, put it this way, judging by his past 18 months or so, the next opportunity he gets, he'll be terrible. That's kind of how it's gone with him. He'll offer a glimmer, show you what he's capable of, show you that he does have a high ceiling. I've always thought that. But it's just a consistency thing with him. With Ox, the next time he plays, he could be really, really bad and look a bit headless, to be honest. And strange decisions on the ball and things like that. But as a player with potential and what he could be, I've always looked at him and thought he can be, to an extent, what he wants, really. But it's just never really came off. And I think he's 28 now, and considering he's 28, Milner's 35, Harvey Elliott's young and injured, Curtis Jones is really young. I think Ox should be playing a lot more than he is. So, if I was him, I would be concerned. I would probably be in a position now where I'm trying to almost perform to impress potential buyers, as bad as it sounds. Because I'd be surprised if at any stage now he became a regular starter for Liverpool.
Yeah, I always fancy him actually in the Champions League to do quite well, partly because of the kind of teams that he's coming up against, but also because you've got the 5 substitutes. There's a bit more of a chance for him to actually get on the pitch. Like you say, I mean, as good as he was, can we see him starting against Manchester United? Probably not. Will he come off the bench against United? Well, it's only 3 subs, so again, probably not. It's sort of a difficult one for him to get minutes for Liverpool at the moment. And I think after all the injuries and inconsistencies, I think the one thing he does need is to just get on the pitch regularly and try and sort of work his way back slowly to form. But that's 2 big wins then for Liverpool this week. The Reds will hope to make that 3 against Manchester United, and we will preview that game next. We have sort of touched upon it a little bit here and there so far in the podcast, but I wanted to begin with the opposition manager, Josh. It's probably not the obvious place to start as a preview for most games, but I think for Manchester United, it does make a fair bit of sense. I'm going to start by saying I think he's done a decent job, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, at United. He's not Klopp, he's not Tuchel, and he's not Guardiola, but he has done a decent job. Is he the issue? Is he holding Manchester United and the squad that they've got back, do you think, at the moment?
Yes, I think he is. But I would echo your thoughts, and I would actually elaborate, saying I think he's done a great job. I think he's done the job he was employed to do, in my opinion. When he took over, Manchester United were in a bit of a bad period. The feeling around the club was generally bad. They'd lost away a little bit on the pitch and in the transfer market. And I think generally the squad needed almost cleansing in a way. I think he's done exactly that. And he's restored Champions League football. We're now in a position now where we think that it's very unlikely that United are going to go without Champions League football, even if they had a bad season. And a lot of that stems from the squad that they've built. And alongside that squad, I think he's obviously he's integrated Greenwood. He has improved Luke Shaw considerably and brought him back to what we thought he was going to be while he was at Southampton. And obviously overseeing the signature of Bruno Fernandes, who I think is very good as well. But his job, in my opinion, is done. I think he's done his job. The next step for United has to be, okay, now we go and win everything. That's their next step, and he's not gonna do that for them. He's just not that coach. He's not. He is exactly what Lampard was when Lampard was dismissed and Tuchel was brought in. That was the difference that Tuchel made. He had a very good squad, But just because of Tuchel's ability, his attention to detail, his tactical awareness, his ability to use a squad, and his ability to win, Tuchel just made that last difference that Lampard couldn't, really. I think if you look at United are in that position now. They're literally in that exact position where they are ready to win now, immediately. But they don't have the coach to do it. And somewhat surprisingly, unlike... Because you would group them alongside Chelsea over the past 20 years when it comes to English dominance and stuff like that. But Chelsea have went down the cold-hearted route almost of getting rid of a legend and appointing the man to win. But United don't seem to be doing it, and I'm not sure they even will. They obviously signed a new deal in the summer. And although you look at United's squad, and I do think they definitely need a midfielder, I'll be honest, I still think that the ceiling of that squad is getting limited by the coach, not the players. I say all the time, you're only as good as your players. But you will get to a point where, okay, the manager starts to have a bit of an influence. And when you're in the league with Klopp, Pep, Tuchel, this level of opposition as well in terms of squads, Liverpool squad, Chelsea squad, you just need that extra 5 or 10% or whatever a coach will get from you. And I think, although Solskjaer's done a really good job, I think that next step, if United are going to win a major trophy, will come through a new coach, and I'm just not sure they're going to do it.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one, isn't it, for them? I mean, he does have a tendency every so often to win a big game or two and save his job for another few months. They've got a big run of games starting with Liverpool to come as well. So there's a good chance that might well happen again. But how do you expect United to play this game? I mean, obviously the crowds are back. They're going to be backed. It's going to be intense. I think the United crowd are going to want them to go and attack Liverpool and be intense on the pitch and try and press them. But I almost wonder if that's almost a bit counterproductive, because they're just not a team that is set up and in tune to be able to press Liverpool in the way that their fans maybe might want them to. They're probably better set up to be a counter-attacking side, but I just wonder whether the Old Trafford crowd might not let them do that.
No, I don't think they'll use any sort of high pressing type thing, but I would expect them to play roughly like Atletico Madrid played. I think they'll sit in a bit of a block type thing. And I think when the ball comes in to that area, they'll be really aggressive, standing on your toes and things like that. Hopefully to the extent that the ball gets released and he can counter-attack through the likes of, they have got outstanding individual talent on the attacking side of the game. What I will say is I really hope that he bottles it, Solskjaer. I hope that he picks the team that looks great on paper but doesn't work. I hope he picks that, but whether he will, I don't know. I think he would be mad to pick anything other than a midfield two of McTominay and Matic, or McTominay and Fred, or, he has to pick at least two of those. If he doesn't, I mean, good luck, because it's just not the kind of opponent when it comes to Liverpool where you can field Ronaldo, Pogba, Bruno, Greenwood, all of these luxury players that they do to an extent need carrying off the ball defensively. And I think if Pogba plays in the midfield too, it'll be a massive problem for them. But I think because of the makeup of the squad, I must admit, when I say earlier, Solskjaer is the issue and stuff like that, I do think, although I agree with, I think he's also given himself a massive issue getting Ronaldo in. He really has. I said at the time, it won't do anything for them in terms of climbing up the table. I'm still pretty confident in saying that. He's obviously a very, very good individual on the football pitch, but he's a massive tactical problem for them, because he's that kind of player where he has to play, and he has to play up front. He doesn't press, and he's 36. Pogba is also in the mould of a player who has to play. Can't play in central midfield because he's too much of an issue, really. So he kind of has to play on the left of a front four. And in a 4-2-3-1. So there already is two positions taken up by Pogba and Ronaldo. Bruno has to play as the 10. There's only one place left for Sancho, that's on the right. Sancho doesn't really, you could argue he needs a bit of carrying as well. So it is a squad that is very imbalanced. It's the balance in that squad is broken, and I would be really, really shocked if he doesn't fix the balance to face Liverpool, because it could be a bit of a bloodbath if he doesn't.
I think one of the biggest issues for me in terms of Cristiano Ronaldo is the sort of knock-on effect that it has on Mason Greenwood, because I think he is such a top young player, and it's obviously going to mean that he will get fewer minutes on the pitch. The difference between Liverpool and United strategy is something we've spoken about plenty of times and is fairly obvious, but it kind of strikes me as just such a really obvious point and a real sort of perfect example of the difference. Obviously, Liverpool with Harvey Elliott, and we know the injury around him this summer, but they've not signed a midfielder because they thought they were going to have Harvey Elliott in that position. At United, Ronaldo had to come in because they didn't want him going to City. But for Mason Greenwood, he must be thinking, well, maybe there's a few less chances for him to come in and impress.
Yeah, and Greenwood is a perfect example of the job Solskjaer has done, specifically squad-wise. Since he came in, there's been a lot more, I'd say, consideration around the squad, not adding players for the sake of adding players, being patient with your number one targets and things like that. Just being a lot more sensible and a lot more long-term with your thinking. But after all that work, it has kind of been blown out the water just because you've got Ronaldo in. Because you've also got Cavani there, who, in my opinion, is, in terms of the squad and how you would use the squad, you would use Cavani exactly how you would use Ronaldo in most situations. The only difference is Ronaldo has to start, whereas Cavani, he could play as a substitute for 75% of the season. He wouldn't be bothered. So in terms of the way United have constructed their squad in the past few years, they have generally done things right, and they got themselves into a position in the summer where things were looking fairly healthy. And if, rather than getting Ronaldo in, they got in somebody like Ananda Herrera, for example, who they lost a few seasons ago on a free. If they got someone like that in, someone like a Wijnaldum, they could be having a great season. I still don't think Solskjaer would take them to league title winning levels, but they would have balance and they would have a good balanced 11. But because Ronaldo's came in, it's just a big tactical issue that everybody has to work around. And the way Liverpool have got a front, say for example, a front three from four players who can kind of play anywhere. Salah can play on the right through the middle. Firmino can play through the middle as number 10. Mane can play both flanks or through the middle. Jota can play anywhere. So Liverpool have got such variety in attack that you're not fixed to one specific thing. When it comes to United, Ronaldo was fixed up front. Bruno was fixed as the 10. Pogba can't play in centre midfield. So it's just a very messy squad. Now, all of a sudden, even though it wasn't the case beforehand, and as I said, it all stems really from feeling like you have to get Ronaldo in when they didn't really,
Yeah, just to finish off on the podcast, then I'm gonna throw something at you that you don't know is coming here, but kind of inspired by Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville's combined Liverpool and Manchester United 11 on Monday Night Football. We're going to go through what we think a combined 11 might be for the teams. We won't go through every single position. I'll kind of speed things up a little bit by saying, well, how many Manchester United players would get into this Liverpool team? I don't think my team was the same as either Carragher or Neville's, but it is very much Liverpool dominant. And I don't know, I think there's maybe an argument for 2, maximum 3 United positions in that squad. How would your combined 11 look, do you think?
Right, so I would go Alisson. We need to stress, by the way, that you have put me on the spot with this one.
Yes, very much.
So I would go Alisson, Trent, Matip, Van Dyke, Robertson, I'll stick with Robertson there. I would go with a midfield 2 of Fabinho and Henderson or Thiago. I think I can't really choose between them, to be honest. I would go Salah on the right, Mane on the left, or Rashford. Bruno was the 10. I'm going to have to choose whether Ronaldo's in this team, man. Oh, God.
I'll tell you what, up until this point, you're exactly the same as me. I've got Bruno as the 10. Rashford or Mane, I think you can argue either way. And I went with Ronaldo, even though obviously he doesn't press and it wouldn't really fit in real life. I think if it's a straight swap between either Firmino or Ronaldo, I think you've got to go Ronaldo.
In this Liverpool team now, I think against most opponents, if you support Ronaldo as Liverpool's central lone striker type thing, I think he'd score shed loads. There would be plenty of games though where Klopp wouldn't play him because of what he doesn't do on the defensive side of the game. But I do think generally in most games, like Liverpool have just played Watford, for example, I think Ronaldo would come in there. And I do recall comments a while back. I think Klopp was speaking to Wenger, and Wenger mentioned about how everyone buys into the Liverpool press and all that sort of stuff. And Klopp's response was a general rule that he has is, and he actually said this, he said, unless you're Messi or Cristiano, then defend. Simple rules. That was his quote. So I do think that from a tactical perspective, some players are that good that they are deserving of luxury status. The higher up the game you go, you have to be ridiculously good to get to that level. Messi is always that. Messi will spend the majority of the game walking, but he's that good, that much of a difference maker, that he's deserving of that. That's fine. We will carry him type thing. I will say that Ronaldo's getting to a point now where he's probably being less and less weighed down. Whether Klopp would carry him now, I don't know. A few years back, I think he would have, certainly. But yeah, it's that's an interesting question, to be honest. And it did make me think during the recent United game, when he got beat by Leicester, it did make me think how Pep might have used him, because obviously City were linked with him. Manchester City have an established system now at the minute, but Pep Guardiola very much getting rid of a player's bad habits and making sure every player buys in. Now, Ronaldo has plenty of bad habits on the ball. You know, he's inclined to roam and get involved with build-up when he doesn't need to and stuff, and shoot from distance and all that stuff. And he doesn't press. So I would have loved to see how Pep coached him, because I think Pep would have, despite the fact he's Ronaldo and he's 36 and stuff like that, I think Pep would have looked at him and thought, I can improve you loads. But it just didn't happen. But yeah, when it comes to Liverpool 11, I don't know. I can't really pick a centre striker, but I think it depends on the opponent. But yeah, we've got 10 out of 11, the same at least.
Yeah, it's a very tough one, isn't it? I know Roberto Firmino, I think for this game against Manchester United is probably one of those that you would definitely want in there. Had a very good game at Old Trafford last season, of course. Very last thing then, before we do finish, I'll just get a score prediction and how you think the game might go on Sunday from you. I think Liverpool could go there and win. Obviously, United do tend to sort of increase their performances for these big games. It's quite a difficult one to call, I think.
It is, yeah, especially considering you just don't know who's going to play for United. You know, if Pogba plays in centre midfield, if Maguire plays again, he looked incredibly unfit against Leicester. So if Ronaldo even plays, is Ronaldo a given to play? I'm not really sure. So, given Liverpool's firepower this season, I think Liverpool will definitely score. But looking at Liverpool against Atletico Madrid and looking at Liverpool in certain games this season, I don't think we've looked as defensively safe as usual. So I do think there's the potential that Liverpool go there and dominate, but I'm going to say 1-1. Every time we go to Old Trafford, specifically when there's crowd there, at least under Solskjaer, he just seems to be really up for it. Solskjaer seems to generally know how to play against Liverpool in terms of preventing them a little bit. So I am expecting a tricky game, but as I said, I will be really intrigued to see what 11 he picks. Obviously, even now we're recording on the Wednesday. I'm intrigued to see what 11 he picks tonight to face Atalanta. But the team sheet will decide a lot for this game for me.
Yeah, there could be quite a few clues, I think, in that Champions League team. If Ronaldo doesn't play, for example, that probably will mean that he is definitely in the lineup for Sunday. But Analysing Anfield will be back next week, I should say, with both Dave and Josh. And there's plenty more content to come, both pre and post Manchester United, across the Blood Red channel around that too. Until next time, though, it's goodbye for now.